Once upon a time on an island surrounded by nothing at all, there lived a crab. This crab's name was Timothy. Timothy loved the ocean. He didn't know why. Maybe it was about his father who was lost at sea. Nevertheless, he came to the beach every day. However, some days he wondered about the land beyond the sea, but he wouldn't have to wonder for much longer. Timothy wished he could visit the beach more. He lived in a tree, and thus it took longer for him to get to the water. He wanted a home near the ocean, but the ducks lived there and didn't want him in their land. He couldn't even live in the clearing near it, because that was Dave the gardener's land. Timothy still went to the beach every day. However, one day the weather became dreary. Everyone stayed inside except Timothy. Timothy stayed at the beach, even though it was raining. He had done it before, but this time the winds and rain were stronger than ever before. All at once he lost grip of the rocks and fell into the water. The current overpowered Timothy, and he was swept away into the sea. Days passed, and the rain came to a stop. Everyone was back outside, except Timothy. Greg the duck was walking by the beach. He and the villagers looked everywhere, but couldn't find Timothy. He remembered how much Timothy loved the beach. He looked at the rock Timothy usually sat upon. It looked as though part of the rock had broken off. Suddenly Greg thought of an idea. He hopped aboard his father's boat and headed out to sea. He was going to find Timothy. But no sooner had Greg left, the storm returned. Greg lost control of the ship and plunged into the water. He drifted ashore days later. He was on an island, a mysterious island. His boat was in pieces. There was no way to repair it. He walked along the beach calling out Timothy's name. However, instead of Timothy hearing it, it was some sharks who did. They began chasing Greg. He ran across the island into a patch of trees. Suddenly, he was pulled up into the branches. It was Timothy. Greg was delighted, but Timothy hushed him. He told Greg about the sharks and how they had a wall around the island that kept everyone in. He'd been trying to escape for days, but to no avail. Timothy told Greg that they were going to hop down in 3 seconds. As soon as they did, the sharks resumed their chase. Timothy and Greg ran to the big tree in the middle of the island. They climbed to one of the branches towards the top, but the sharks followed. Timothy told Greg that he needed to go across the zip line. Greg was scared, but the sharks were almost to them. Greg and Timothy zipped all the way across, but the sharks tried to climb the way across. Timothy pulled out a pair of scissors and cut the line. The sharks fell to the ground. Timothy and Greg stayed on the wall that night. They talked about the island. Timothy told Greg that there was a wall surrounding the island. The sharks tricked people into entering and then would close the wall so they couldn't escape. Greg asked how they could escape. Timothy thought for a moment. He didn't know. They fell asleep soon after. The next morning, Timothy woke up and went off in search of food. Suddenly, he was spotted by the sharks. Timothy ran as fast as his legs could carry him. Too fast. He didn't notice where he was going and fell into a cave. The sharks left, as they couldn't see where he was anymore. Greg woke up to the sound of nothing. Timothy was gone. Greg went off to search for him. Back in the cave, Timothy stumbled upon an airplane. A note was attached. To whoever finds this plane, use it to leave this wretched island. I'm sorry I couldn't join you. It is too late for me. Back outside, Greg stumbled upon a group of animals working. He watched from a distance. The animals were slaves to the sharks. They were working on cranking a pedal that seemed to make the light on the tower shine brighter. Greg wanted to go closer, but knew better than to alert the sharks of his location. In the cave, Timothy looked at the bottom of the note. He screamed in shock. The note was signed by no one other than his father. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. The cave was being opened by Greg. He pried it open. They relayed the information to each other. They had a plan formulated, and this time they were going to escape. Timothy grabbed the battery out of the security tower. This alerted the sharks immediately. Timothy knew this. Meanwhile, Greg was helping the prisoners escape. They were reluctant at first, but were eager to escape. Timothy ran to the plane and put in the battery. The three ran up to the plane and hopped in, but the sharks had followed. Timothy hopped out of the plane with his spear. Greg yelled for him to get on. Timothy told him to start the plane and he'd catch up. The plane crashed into the wall. Timothy was trying to back the sharks away from the plane. The sharks were about to eat Timothy and the plane swept them up. They flew away, all the way back to the island. The villagers were so pleased. They welcomed the new villagers with open arms or feathers. The ducks finally allowed Timothy onto their land, and he stayed up past his bedtime just to see the sunset. Greg watched it with him. Timothy still wonders about the land beyond the horizon, but I think he knows that sometimes the best travels are those we can only dream about. Don't you?